Today we're looking at the first session in our new quarter, still in Genesis. We're in Genesis 22, which is my favorite chapter in this entire book. Uh, Next time I do a video, whatever chapter that is, I'll probably tell you that's my favorite chapter too. But I really enjoy Genesis. It's a great place to look at and see what God's doing here. But start out your lesson with a question and think about the question. Get your people focused in on the main purpose of what you're going to be talking about. So the question I would ask you to suggest you ask this week is, what's the hardest thing you've ever had to do? What's the hardest thing you've ever had to do? Now, I want to tell you what mine is. Mine happened back in 1998, a short time after my family and I moved to Little Rock. We have two sons, and our oldest son, Matt, he stayed in St. Louis where we had lived for a little while, and he was going to finish up the semester at junior college up there. And during the process of him staying up there, he dropped off the face of the earth. We couldn't find him. I went looking for him, could not find him. He just was gone. And we didn't have any idea where he was. And I got a phone call one morning after we had moved here, and the person on the other end did not identify themselves. They said, "Mr. Remington, I hate to tell you this, but your son Matt took an overdose last night and killed himself." Well, that'll stop your world. Whatever you're doing, that'll just change everything. And as soon as he said that, then he hung up. Now, Matt has already lived a troubled life. He was around 21 at this time. He was on drugs, alternative lifestyles, sexually assaulted before he came to live with us. But my world just stopped when I got that phone call. Everything else I had planned for that day just came to a standstill. I would not get that done, I can tell you. Even with all the difficulties, I love Matt, and I didn't want this to happen to him. And I just was paralyzed for a little bit. Well, I tried calling Matt. I tried emailing him. This was before texting, so couldn't do a text, but didn't get an answer either way. Prayed about it, kept praying, called Wanda, scared her to death too. But next thing I started to do was I began calling hospitals and sheriff's departments and police departments, morgues, trying to find a body. That is not a fun thing to do. The bad part was I was not really surprised with all that Matt had been involved in for a while. I was not really surprised that I got this phone call that this might happen. I couldn't find him anywhere, dead or alive. I could not find Matt. Finally, after several hours of desperately looking around everywhere I could and praying like crazy, he called. Matt was fine. Why this person had called, I have no idea. I don't know if they got bad information. Matt didn't tell me who it was. Maybe he didn't know. I don't know. Who this person was, we still don't know. But my son was alive, and that was the main thing. But that was the hardest day I think I've ever had in my life. Those moments make a permanent mark in your life. Sort of like what happens with Abraham in chapter 22 here of Genesis. Now, there's a couple different ways to look at this lesson, and I just want to sort of go over those. One is to look at all the similarities between Isaac in this episode and Jesus. There are so many similarities here. You may be familiar with the term typology. That's what this is, where something in the Old Testament paints a picture of what Jesus did in the New Testament. Isaac is a type of Christ. And so there's a lot of things, and you can spend a lot of time on this, and it's very interesting to look at all this stuff. There's no bigger event in the Old Testament than this one to help us see a picture of Jesus. Had a friend, I may have told on another video, he said, if you don't see Jesus on every page of the Old Testament, you missed him. And that is very, very true. But there's a lot of close comparisons. The sacrifice of someone who had done nothing wrong. The 3 days involved in all of this. Isaac carrying the wood on his back, Jesus carrying the cross on his. And there's so many more, and you can get a list of these. You can check with almost any Bible commentary or Google this stuff, and you can find an exhaustive list on that. And you could spend probably 2 weeks in Sunday school class just looking at those, and they're pretty fascinating. But I want to focus on looking at this another way. As I prepared this, I didn't have access to our curriculum since this is the first week of the quarter. So I'm not sure how our Bible study writers have handled this, but I want you to hear what I think may be the most important part of this. I want to focus on what this teaches us about God. Now, I have always said, and always will say, the Bible is not the story of Abraham and Isaac and Moses and Joseph and David and Daniel and Paul and different folks in the Bible, the accounts of them. It's not the story of them. It's the story of God and how he uses very normal people to reveal himself through just everyday events, and sometimes not everyday events, but God uses very normal people like you, people like me. But the Bible is the story of God. And once we start looking at that, it makes more sense from Genesis through Revelation when we see it of God revealing himself to us. But there's a couple things before we get into that part, a couple things I just want to make sure that we cover and you understand a little bit about these. The first is the idea of child sacrifice. Now, to us, this is pretty hideous. We can't even think on terms like this. But this would not really have caught Abraham off guard like it would us. I'm not talking about the personal devastation he felt of offering up his own son, the son of the promise, who God had promised him all these years before. But I'm just talking about the idea of child sacrifice. This happened regularly in the peoples all around the Israelites, the Canaanites, when they get to the promised land. Canaanites do this on a regular basis. A lot of the other countries do too, a lot of the other peoples. In their worldview, the gods of fertility had a right to demand a portion of what had been produced. And so they offered, the people would offer grain or animals or children as sacrifices so that the fertility gods would bless them with more grain, more animals, and more children. So it was not totally out of the way and totally abhorrent like it is to us. But the personal cost involved with Abraham and all this was not easy. If you look at verse 2, where God says, calls Isaac Abraham's only son. Oh, and by the way, Pastor Matt covered some of this last Sunday's sermon. So this is the last Sunday that we have to fight our pastor over our Bible study, because next week he gets off or this coming Sunday, he gets off into Moses. So we don't have to worry about him in Genesis anymore. But I told him Sunday, he just made me rewrite everything that I had prepared for this. But just pick on him, of course. But there's some things that will overlap and some things that you can draw from what he said. And it doesn't hurt to repeat those things, because that's how people learn, is through repetition. Okay? So, not a problem. This is the son that God had promised him at least 25 years ago, depending on how old Isaac was. Most people think he was between 15 and 25. Some people think as old as 30, but I think he was more in that 15 to 25 age range here. So you're looking at 40 to 50 years since God first promised a child to Abraham and Sarah. So, that's a long time, long time. And here God was asking him to give him up. Now, what about Ishmael? I think Pastor Matt covered this a little bit too. He was not the son of the promise, so God did not include him in this. And by the way, as Pastor Matt also said Sunday, this is the first time in the Bible, chapter 22 of Exodus, that the word love is used. And it talks about Abraham's love for his son. So those are some things there as you maybe think about the child sacrifice part and why that was even there. The second thing I want to point out is Moriah. There's no such thing as a coincidence. God does everything intentionally. Everything he has a purpose. And the mountain they were heading to was the same place that David bought from a guy where he wanted to build an altar in 2 Samuel chapter 24. Now this is a very interesting background here, and I won't go a lot into it, but remember David had wanted to do a census and see how many guys in his army that he had. And God said no, but David went ahead and did it anyway. And God said, David, you're going to have to pay for that. And one of the ways that David, he gave him 3 ways he could pick from, and David ended up choosing a 3-day slaughter people. 70,000 men and women and children were slaughtered. And at the end of this, David just said, God, please stop, please stop. And he built an altar and offered a sacrifice to God for not God killing all these people, but for God being the God that he was, who had control over David. And this was sort of a sacrifice where David had said, I'm sorry. There was all kinds of stuff going on with that. So that was where we are here at Mount Moriah. It's also the place where Solomon built the first temple. And as Pastor Matt talked about Sunday, it's also the place where Jerusalem was and where Jesus was crucified. So there's a lot of history here with Mount Moriah. Moriah was a series of hills, mountains in this area, and so we're not sure about which one exactly he was on, but it's all this general area right here. Okay, so that's very, very important too. A third thing is maybe the age of Isaac. I think I've already covered that. Another thing is the distance of 3 days. Why does God tell Abraham to travel 3 days away? When Abraham takes out, if it just been, okay, the next valley or the next hill, it could have been, well, I can figure out a way to talk myself out of this, over a short trip. But when he takes out for 3 days, this is not a let's get this over with before I have time to back out thing. It wasn't that at all. He had to travel with that haunting confusion in his mind and his heart about all of this. And for 3 days, he could try to rationalize how to get out of this. But by the time he got there, it was very obvious, if he went through all that he was steadfast in what he was going to do, and he was going to follow God no matter what. And the last thing to think about before we get into the real lesson here is, what about Sarah? Where is Sarah in all this? What was in her heart and in her mind? That might be something worth pursuing a little bit in your class. Don't get caught up there, but just something to think about. The mom is very, very important in family relationships, and in this instance right here, she is not mentioned. So just envision yourself where Sarah may have been. So let's get back to the main thing here. What is God trying to show us in this event? Some say that God was just showing us it's a way to show that God can overcome any obstacle. That's true. But what if God was the obstacle? God was the one who had put this in front of Abraham and said, this is what I want you to do. God was actually the obstacle in Abraham's way here of living a life of the promise and seeing Isaac grow up and become the next generation of a great country. It's very hard to sort of get that in our mind that God might be an obstacle here. But the real obstacle may be a little bit different than that. It may be that God was trying to see if Abraham was more attached to the promises of the covenant than he was to God himself. Let me say that again. Abraham may be more attached to the promised blessings and benefits than he was actually attached to God himself. Now, were they more attached to the benefits? Very possible. That's the way we are sometimes. There are a lot of churches, a lot of name it and claim it churches, prosperity gospel, where people are more attached to the gifts that they get than they are to the giver of the gifts. He's not near as important as the gifts that they receive. What's in it for me rather than who is in it for me? Big, big difference there. So the most important, or the most difficult thing to see in all this is to understand why God did such a thing. Now, as I mentioned earlier, the child sacrifice part, Abraham would have been exposed to that. It wouldn't be a very nice thing, but he would have been exposed to it before. And he doesn't seem to question that. But God had previously asked Abraham to do things that were very difficult, emotionally, physically, stressful. Remember about the first one back in Genesis 12 when Abraham had grown up he was 75 years old and grown up in the country all those years of many other gods, false gods. And he heard the voice of the one true God saying, "Get up and leave your country and follow me, and I'll tell you where you're going when you get there." That is emotionally and physically stressful. But God had brought him through that. The difference here, and listen closely, here's what I think the real difference here is. God does not really intend for Abraham to make this sacrifice. He just wants to see what's going on here in Abraham's heart. And then there's another reason for that too I want to give you in just a minute. His purpose is to see what Abraham is prepared to give up. If Abraham is more attached to the benefits that he gets from God's covenant, or is Abraham more attached to God himself? Now, what is accomplished by God's testing Abraham? Several things, and all of these are correct to a point. To strengthen Abraham's faith, to give Isaac a first-hand experience of the God his father had come to know over the years, to prove to the world that God made a good choice when he chose Abraham, to offer a picture of the father's pain in sacrificing his son, as God eventually did through Jesus, to show how God hates human sacrifice. Like I said, all of these are partially true, but they're not the full answer. The full answer comes in verse 12. Look at verse 12 in chapter 22. It says, God said, "Do not stretch out your hand against the lad and do nothing to him, for now I know that you fear God, since you have not withheld your son, your only son, from me." Don't read anything into that verse, just take it for what it says. This was done for God's benefit. God focused on what he gained out of this event right here. Now, this sounds a little strange, but let me explain what I'm talking about here. In God's omniscience, did he know what Abraham was going to do? Yes, he knew. He already knew. But there are many times throughout the Bible, and even today, where God desires us to act out our faith and our worship. He asks us to pray, even though he knows what we're going to pray for, and he may already have the answer in the pipeline. It may already be in motion. He wants us to praise him, even though he already knows our heart. But God asks us to act out our faith and love. It pleases him for us to do these things. It honors him for us to do these things. It's just like in your family. If you're a husband or a mom, you know that your family loves you, but it's good to hear it every once in a while, and it's good to see them act on that and show you how much they love and honor you. So it's the same type thing here. God got pleasure out of seeing Abraham follow his leadership here. Now, there is more. Abraham's being asked to go above and beyond anything that he's ever previously demonstrated in his faith. He cut ties with his family and with his homeland, but there was actually something in it for him. God had promised him a new family, a new land, a new start, all these things. Every other thing that God had asked Abraham to do throughout his life had been balanced with a promise of that made it worth his while. There was something to lose, but Abraham also had even more to gain by following God. But here, there is absolutely nothing to gain because he's losing his son, the son of the promise. There's no offsetting of this for that. The entirety of God's promise was wrapped up in this one son, Isaac, that God was now asking him to give up. And the stakes were a lot higher here. You know, Abraham was far beyond the years of having a son. God had taken care of that. Excuse me. Did Abraham follow God for what he was getting out of it, or simply for his love of God? And I think we can see through this, he did this through his love. Abraham's actions and words show the truth. If there's any doubt that God can work this out, certainly he's going to do this. He leaves for Moriah immediately. He follows God's instructions completely. Nothing to show his faith ever wavered here. Now, we like to think that maybe he was scared as he went along, and maybe he was, But God knows his heart, and there was evidence here, no evidence actually, that from God's perspective, that Abraham's inside was any different than his outside. He followed God without question. Now, if you go back and look at the end of chapter 21, it looks like Abraham seems to have reached some kind of normal in his life, whatever normal is. But then God turns all that upside down. Should we desire, as believers, should we desire a normal life? Nothing crazy going on, just peace and smooth? Some days are good for that. We need that every once in a while, but not with God. It's not going to happen that way. In fact, I can tell you, if your life is smooth, going smooth right now with no bumps in the road, you're missing something. God's doing something in your life that you're not seeing, or you're not close enough to God at this point to even realize what he's happening. There's no place in God's word where he promises us a problem-free life, ever. It's not going to happen, and we need to get used to that. You will see a good example of that. Read Ecclesiastes chapter 3, verses 1 through 6. Ecclesiastes chapter 3, verses 1 through 6. Use that in your lesson Sunday if you like. But that's what that tells us. If you're walking a life with God, if you're walking with him, there's no such thing as status quo. If your spiritual life is not moving forward, you're actually moving backwards. You're losing ground. You can't stand still. I had lunch with a friend a couple weeks ago. I guess he thought I was old. I'm 112. I don't know where he got the idea I was old. And he was around 50. And he was struggling a little bit in his Christian life, and we were talking about that. And he asked me, as I looked back over my life, what had been the highlight or the highlights of my life. And there have been many. God has used me. I've not always been faithful like I should, but God has used me in a lot of different ways, just like he's used most of you all. But I shocked him when I said, my best days are yet to come. My best days are yet to come. And he couldn't figure that out. He thought I was in the place in my life where everything was just sort of even keel. It never gets that way. I don't care how old you are, how young you are, your life is never in that place. God is always doing something. Life's a roller coaster. Some people like roller coasters. They see them as exhilarating. Some people are scared to death of them. I do not like them at all as far as the roller coaster part. But the difference between liking them and not liking them is control. Are you in control of this? You don't like, if you think you have to be in control of everything, you're probably not going to like roller coasters because you are totally out of control. But if you feel like it is under control, but it's not by you, you're probably going to feel really good about roller coasters and get on them as often as you can. When we feel we've lost control, we become anxious and fearful. But we see no evidence of Abraham feeling that way here. The difference between fear and exhilaration is the belief we have the situation truly under control, even if it's not us who has control. If God's in control, guess what? We are still in good shape, always in good shape. As believers, we may free fall through life from time to time, but as long as we know that God's in control, guess what? We're going to be okay. Life is not always going to be easily figured out. If it's that way, we're not following God. We're held by God, who is in absolute control. God never promises us a smooth ride, no matter how old you are. I'm 112. You're younger than that. So I don't care how old you are, but God never promises you a smooth ride. Our only guarantee is that we can trust him. Now, this entire event was God testing Abraham. The question to us is, are we willing to follow God even if there's nothing in it for us? See, Abraham got, other than a bigger picture of God, and probably ask himself the rest of his life, why did God send me through all that? But there was nothing that Abraham gained out of that, but there's a whole lot that you and I can gain by looking at this story and seeing what God did here. Expect God's going to push you out of your comfort zone. And don't be surprised if his goal is not to meet all of your life expectations. It ain't going to happen. If that's what you're looking for, you are barking up the wrong tree. Listen, God is more interested in your character than he is in your comfort. Always. And so he's always developing your character, even if it makes you uncomfortable. He has you in that difficult job where you are because he's got a plan for you right there. That difficult time in your marriage right now, God wants to use that to show his glory and to show what he can do. You or your family, someone in your family or a friend who's just gotten a devastating medical diagnosis. What is it God's doing through all this? That's what we need to see. Life is not a bed of roses. What do how do you handle stuff like that? There's two questions we can ask. One of those is, and this is always the wrong question. I'm just telling you up front, this is always the wrong question. Why is this happening to me? The second question is, and this is the right question, what is it God wants me to learn from this? Not why is this happening to me, but what is it God wants me to learn from this, through this? Abraham, with all the unknowns he faced, his faith was in his God. Now, God's answers may not be what you expect. My son Matt, that I talked about earlier, we have no idea where he's at. We haven't seen him in several years, and we don't know what's going on. We do know a couple things about him. We know that he's HIV positive. That's a whole different story that I could tell you about someday. And that was before COVID, so Matt may not have survived COVID. He may have already passed away, and we don't even know it. But let me tell you where my confidence lays. It's not in my knowing what's going on with my son. I know God's in control. I pray every day, God, restore Matt to you first, and then everything else will fall into place. And I also pray, God, put a strong believer in Matt's life. If he's still living, put a strong believer in his life so that he can draw him back to where he needs to be and point him to you. Now, whether or not I ever get to see this, my trust is in God. I hope I get to see it, but I don't know. I honestly do not know, but I am okay with that because I know who's in control. And along the way, Juan and I have had all kinds of opportunities to minister to other families who are going through or have gone through the same type situation. It's amazing how many prodigal children we have in families in our church and in families outside our church. Do we like this situation? Of course not. We would not have chosen that for ourselves. But we have learned to never, ever give up on God. And that's what I pray for you for this Sunday. God bless you.